The gavel slammed down hard. Judge Howell leaned forward, her voice cold and sharp as a blade. "Congresswoman Crockett, you will not turn my courtroom into a political circus." The room went completely silent, but Crockett didn't sit down. She lifted her head, locked eyes with the bench, and fired back without a second of hesitation. "Your Honor, the Constitution does not end at your bench." In that one moment, everything shifted, and every single person in that courtroom knew this was no ordinary hearing. This was a full-on showdown. The tension was already suffocating before anyone even opened their mouth. Judge Howell didn't need to raise her voice to control a room. She owned it the second she walked in. Her reputation arrived before she did, and every lawyer present knew exactly what that meant. Long explanations got cut off. Emotional arguments got crushed. Anyone who pushed too hard got put in their place, fast. She leaned forward slightly, fingers resting near the gavel, and said flatly, "This court will maintain order. I will not tolerate grandstanding." The message was crystal clear. She set the pace, the tone, and the outcome. When she spoke, people folded. That was the machine she had built, and it had never failed her until today. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button right now and stay with us for more moments like this. But Jasmine Crockett did not flinch, not even a little. She didn't drop her eyes, she didn't soften her voice. Instead, she came back steady and sharp. "Respectfully, Your Honor, what you call grandstanding is what accountability looks like when people in power would rather not be questioned." A wave of tension rippled through the gallery. Crockett stepped half a pace forward and kept going. For years, courts have been perfectly comfortable hearing from government lawyers. But the moment someone speaks up for people losing their rights, suddenly it's too political. That double standard is exactly why we're here. Those words landed like a sledgehammer. Judge Howell's jaw tightened visibly. The line had been crossed, and the entire room knew it. Crockett didn't come from the world of polished donors and protected party networks. She was built in overcrowded courtrooms through long nights writing emergency injunctions beside clients who showed up terrified because they didn't know if anyone would listen. "I didn't learn constitutional law in a quiet office," Crockett said bluntly. "I learned it standing next to citizens who were denied a ballot, denied housing, denied basic fairness. So forgive me if I don't treat this like an academic exercise." The audience visibly reacted, some nodding, others barely breathing. The room felt electric. Then Crockett went straight for the heart of the case. "Let's be honest about what these laws actually do," she said, her voice growing harder. "Early voting windows are being slashed. Mail ballots are being limited. ID rules are being tightened in ways that, surprise, surprise, always hit the same communities." She paused and stared directly at the bench. "You can call it security all you want, but when working parents can't make it to the polls, when seniors can't access mail ballots, and when poor voters face extra wall after extra wall, that is not security. That is suppression with a new coat of paint." Judge Howell cut in again, sharper this time. "Counsel, this is not a campaign rally. Stay within the boundaries of legal argument." Crockett didn't back down for even a second. She fired right back. "Your Honor, when laws quietly erase millions of voices from the ballot, pretending that isn't political is the real performance." The tension in the room snapped tight. A few people in the gallery actually gasped. Crockett pushed forward without stopping. "Democracy doesn't die in dramatic speeches. It dies in paperwork, deadlines, and barriers designed to look neutral while targeting real people." She leaned slightly into the microphone. I represent voters who stand in line for hours. I represent communities already fighting obstacles every single day. And now they're being told to accept even more barriers in the name of order. That is not law protecting democracy. That is law being used to shrink it. The room felt heavier with every sentence. Judge Howell raised her hand and cut in again before Crockett could finish. "Counsel, answer the question directly," she snapped. Crockett barely paused. She adjusted the microphone and kept going anyway. The judge interrupted again, louder, trying desperately to pull the room back under her control. Crockett finally stopped, looked up, and delivered her next line with ice-cold calm. "If I'm being cut off every time the facts become uncomfortable, then we're not having a legal hearing. We're having a performance to avoid the truth." A murmur spread across the gallery like wildfire. Crockett's tone sharpened even further. "So let's stop dancing around it. Let's talk about what these laws actually do." She reached down and lifted a stack of printed charts, holding them up so the entire front section could see. "These are turnout projections from independent election analysts," she said. "Not activists, not political groups. Data." She pointed to the first page. "Early voting restrictions alone reduce participation by double digits in urban districts." She flipped the page. "Mail ballot limits hit seniors and disabled voters the hardest." Another page. "Tighter ID rules hit minority communities who already face access barriers." Every single time, Judge Howell waved her hand dismissively. "These statistics are not relevant to statutory interpretation," she said. Crockett's response was instant. "They are absolutely relevant when the outcome of your interpretation silences millions of voters." The judge tried to move the hearing forward. Crockett refused to let her. "Your Honor, I formally request these materials be entered into the court record." The room shifted instantly. Heads turned. Reporters sat up straighter. Judge Howell hesitated visibly for the very first time. She looked at the documents, then back at Crockett. "This court is not obligated," Crockett cut straight through it. "This court is obligated to consider evidence that shows constitutional harm." The gallery reacted out loud. Quiet gasps filled the air. Phones came up. Crockett didn't wait for the tension to cool. She pressed forward with speed and precision. "Brown versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court made clear that equal access is not optional. Reynolds versus Sims established that the dilution of voter power violates the Constitution. Harper versus Virginia Board of Elections ruled that financial and procedural barriers cannot be used to block citizens from voting." She delivered each case like a punch, fast, sharp, relentless. The courtroom felt like it was closing in with every word. Judge Howell leaned forward, irritation burning on her face. "Congresswoman," the judge warned, voice rising, "if you continue in this manner, I will consider holding you in contempt." The word hit the room like a bomb. Contempt meant fines, removal, public humiliation. The stakes had just exploded. Crockett didn't blink. She looked straight at the bench. "I am presenting precedent, Your Honor. That is my legal obligation." The room went dead quiet again. She continued, slower now, deliberate. "What's happening here isn't disorder, it's discomfort. Discomfort with hearing how these laws collide directly with constitutional protections." She straightened her posture. "Threatening contempt does not change the law, it does not erase Supreme Court rulings, and it does not make these constitutional violations disappear." The pressure flipped instantly. Now it was the judge under the microscope. Crockett had taken control. of the narrative, the tempo, and the moral high ground. Just as Judge Howell leaned forward to respond, Crockett raised her hand, not timid, not hesitant, but high enough for everyone in the room to see it clearly. The movement was simple, but it hit the courtroom like a shockwave. The judge froze mid-sentence. The clerk stopped typing. Even the bailiff shifted his weight. Crockett's voice cut through the silence. "Your Honor, before you shut this down again, I need this court to hear what I'm about to say." You could hear someone in the back of the room swallow. She held her hand up for another second, letting the tension stretch, letting the moment breathe. Then she lowered it slowly and locked eyes with the bench. "Article 1 of the Constitution created the branch of government I serve in," she said. "That same Constitution created this judiciary, which means this courtroom does not exist because of tradition or personal authority. It exists because the people gave it power." Judge Howell shifted sharply in her seat. Crockett didn't stop. So when you dismiss constitutional harm as political noise, you are not protecting the law. You are shielding the system from accountability." A low murmur rolled through the gallery. Someone whispered, "Wow." Crockett's tone hardened. "A robe does not make anyone untouchable. A gavel does not erase constitutional duty." The silence grew heavier and heavier. Crockett took one deliberate step forward, just enough to make it clear she wasn't going anywhere. "You sit on this bench because the Constitution allows it," she said, "and that same Constitution binds you, not me, not the voters. You." Judge Howell's face went tight. Her knuckles whitened around the gavel. Crockett didn't give her a second to recover. "So let me ask you this, Your Honor," she said, voice steady but razor sharp. "If constitutional arguments are silenced here in a federal courtroom, where exactly are citizens supposed to go?" The question hit the room like a punch to the chest. Crockett kept going. "If people cannot challenge voter suppression in this building, then the promise of justice becomes a slogan instead of a right." A reporter actually gasped out loud. Someone in the front row shook their head in disbelief. Judge Howell opened her mouth, then stopped. She glanced down at her notes, then back up at Crockett. Her voice came out tight and strained. "This court will not be lectured." Crockett cut in without hesitation. "This court is being reminded of its responsibility." The words hit hard. Crockett pressed even deeper. "Because when courts stop listening to constitutional harm, they stop serving the people. And when that happens, legitimacy doesn't fade quietly. It collapses." The room buzzed with tension. Phones were already being raised in the gallery. Everyone could feel the breaking point coming. And then Judge Howell's composure finally shattered. She slammed the gavel down with full force. "This court will take an immediate recess," she snapped, standing up far too quickly. The chair scraped loudly behind her. It wasn't a controlled exit. It was an escape. Gasps erupted across the room. The clerk looked stunned. The bailiff hesitated, completely unsure what to do first. And Crockett, she stayed right where she was, calm, steady, and unshaken, watching the bench empty in real time. The second Judge Howell disappeared through the side door. The courthouse exploded with noise. Reporters poured into the hallway, bumping into each other, shouting into phones, firing off breaking alerts before they even reached the elevators. "Federal judge storms out after confrontation," one voice yelled. Another reporter was already live on camera, breathless, saying, "This just turned into one of the most explosive courtroom moments we've seen in years." Outside those courtroom doors, notifications lit up screens all across the country. Clips of Crockett's words started trending within minutes. "The Constitution does not end at your bench" was everywhere. TikTok, X, YouTube, cable news tickers. What happened inside one federal courtroom had become a national event. Institutions scrambled to respond. The American Bar Association released a carefully worded statement emphasizing the importance of hearing constitutional arguments without intimidation, and civil rights organizations moved even faster. The ACLU praised Crockett for defending democratic access under direct pressure. The NAACP called the confrontation a necessary challenge to judicial overreach. Advocacy groups blasted out emails with screenshots of the moment, framing it as proof that voting rights were under a very real and very immediate threat. What started as one hearing had now become fuel for a full-blown movement. Meanwhile, the damage to Judge Howell's reputation spread. Quietly, but aggressively. Complaints began flooding judicial oversight offices. Legal ethicists posted long threads picking apart her conduct line by line. Inside the courthouse itself, whispers followed her name down every hallway. Other judges avoided eye contact. Some quietly questioned whether she had lost control of the room entirely. Others worried about how the public now viewed the bench as an institution. Nobody wanted to be the next viral clip, and that fear alone started changing behavior. Slowly, shifts became visible. Judges began choosing their words far more carefully. Interruptions became less aggressive. Public rebukes softened in tone. The robe still carried power, but now it carried caution too. Crockett's confrontation had sent a message the system simply could not ignore. Authority works best when it actually listens. Control only holds when it is balanced with real accountability. And for the first time in a long time, the bench itself was being reminded that its power does not exist alone. It exists because the Constitution and the people behind it allow it to. While the institution scrambled, Crockett walked back onto Capitol Hill with full momentum at her back. In closed-door meetings, staffers were already whispering about the hearing before she even sat down. Days later, during a committee exchange when a witness tried to dodge a constitutional question, Crockett leaned into the microphone and dropped a line that sent another wave crashing through social media. "I already spent an afternoon teaching constitutional law to a federal judge," she said calmly. "You are not going to intimidate me with weak answers." The room went silent. Lawmakers stared. The power dynamic shifted on the spot. The media amplified everything. Her courtroom clip played on nightly news, got analyzed by legal commentators, and was broken down frame by frame on political podcasts. Universities began using the footage in constitutional law classes. Professors paused their lectures to show students what real-time pressure advocacy actually looked like. Mock trial teams recreated the confrontation. Students quoted her lines in debate competitions. What happened in that courtroom was no longer just a viral moment. It had become a case study, a teaching tool, and a warning shot to anyone who thought Jasmine Crockett would quietly back down. The shockwave didn't stop in Washington. Grassroots organizations across the country felt the impact within days. Donation pages lit up with traffic. Small dollar contributions poured in from ordinary people who saw themselves in that courtroom moment. Messages flooded campaign inboxes. "Thank you for standing up." Finally, someone said it out loud. Activist networks mobilized fast, organizing town halls, voter education drives, and emergency meetings focused entirely on protecting ballot access. Crockett's confrontation became a rallying symbol. Her words were printed on posters, shared in group chats, and repeated at protests across the country. What started as one woman pushing back against a judge had turned into a nationwide surge of energy around voting rights. The education world moved just as quickly. Law schools began dissecting the moment in real time. Professors replayed the clip sentence by sentence, breaking down Crockett's entire strategy. Calm tone under pressure, precision with legal precedent, absolute refusal to retreat when authority pushed back. Students started calling it the Crockett method. Mock trial competitions introduced scenarios modeled directly after the confrontation. Debate teams used her lines as prime examples of persuasive constitutional argument. The message in every classroom was the same. This wasn't just drama. This was a blueprint for challenging power without losing control. The moment didn't stay inside America's borders, not even close. International media picked it up within hours. Headlines overseas framed it as a snapshot of America's internal struggle. Democracy under pressure. Institutions being challenged from within. Political commentators in Europe called it a rare public collision between judicial authority and constitutional activism. Others described it as proof that American democracy wasn't quiet or comfortable, but loud, messy, and constantly being tested. Some called it instability. Supporters called it transparency. Either way, the world was watching, and the image kept replaying. A congresswoman standing her ground while a federal judge walked away. But inside the United States, the symbolism cut even deeper. To many Americans, this wasn't just Crockett versus Howell. This was grassroots accountability going head-to-head with establishment power. This was a civil rights attorney turned lawmaker standing in front of a system that has historically told people like her to stay quiet and stay in line. The parallels were impossible to ignore. People saw echoes of past civil rights battles, moments when ordinary citizens challenged institutions that claimed neutrality but carried deeply unequal weight. Crockett didn't need to say it out loud. The image said it for her. One figure standing firm, one bench left empty. That contrast burned itself into public memory. As the noise faded and the headlines slowed, the deeper meaning of that day became impossible to miss. This was never about winning an argument. It was never about embarrassing a judge. It was about redefining who truly owns the Constitution. Crockett didn't treat it like a document reserved for lawyers and courtrooms. She treated it like a living promise, one that belongs to every single person who depends on it. In that courtroom, she didn't just defend voting rights. She challenged the idea that authority gets the final word simply because it holds a title. The final image stayed with everyone who witnessed it. Crockett walking out of the courtroom, calm, steady, not celebrating, not looking back. Behind her, the judge's bench sat completely empty. No gavel, no voice, just silence where power used to sit. It wasn't dramatic music or flashing cameras that made it powerful. It was the simplicity. One person leaving with her principles fully intact. One institution forced to pause and reckon with itself. And that is exactly why this moment still matters. Because in the end, the gavel can command silence. But the Constitution commands history.